Get some!
Welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. Also the news with you guys, lots of news. Has Univision flipped in favor of Donald Trump? We're gonna talk about that later in the show. Interesting developments. And then obviously plenty of stories about domestic news. Trying to cut Social Security again, Republicans are and bankers are, of course. And yes, of course, we have news about Gaza. All right, Anna, take it away.
Well, we begin with that news on Gaza, so take it away.
We were told that we won't enter Shifa. We entered, and in the spirit, we say a simple thing. There is no place in Gaza that we will not reach.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu brags about the IDF's raid of Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, the largest hospital in Gaza that is no longer functioning as a result of not only the ongoing bombardments, not only due to the raid, but of course, the lack of fuel necessary to run the machines at Al-Shifa and pretty much every other hospital in the Gaza Strip. A day after entering Shifa, Israel had yet to produce any evidence showing that there was a Hamas headquarters or command center under the hospital. They did provide what they believe is legitimate evidence of Hamas operating under the hospital, specifically under the MRI unit of the hospital. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as you view some of the evidence that they provided to the press. Let's watch.
The military released a video from the hospital premises showing weapons they said were found inside.
A live grenade, ammunition, fighting vest with insignia, boots and of course uniforms, and last but not least, standard AK-47.
Though so far, they presented no evidence of the massive underground Hamas headquarters Israel alleges lies beneath the hospital.
We've not been able to speak to any of the doctors that we've been in touch with in recent days. As you saw in that report, the Israeli army is saying that it found a number of weapons during searches of the hospital complex. But really, they'd built up this huge narrative about this major strategic secretive underground Hamas headquarters beneath the Al-Shifa hospital. And really all we've been presented with so far is video of a number of Kalashnikovs and some body armor. Perhaps more evidence, more video evidence will be released in the coming days.
Now, Channel 4 News in the UK has been incredible in their reporting. I think they've been incredibly fair, especially relative to other Western media outlets. But if you think they've been too fair to the Palestinians, let's go to the New York Times, which had a very similar take on the evidence provided by the IDF to justify, attacking a hospital. If you don't justify it, it's considered a war crime. So that's the reason why they're trying to make this point about how it's a legitimate military target. A day after the Israeli military took control of Gaza's largest hospital, soldiers on Thursday afternoon were still combing the site that Israel has said concealed a secret Hamas base, but had yet to present much evidence supporting the claim to the public. By Thursday afternoon in Gaza, the only evidence that the Israeli military had so far provided publicly of Al-Shifa's purported dual use was video showing some weapons and equipment, about a dozen guns, a grenade, protective vests, and military uniforms that it said soldiers found within an MRI unit at the hospital. That's typically where people like to store weapons made of metal. Within an MRI unit where machines are basically giant, powerful magnets. Cenk.
And the New York Times said it in the last sentence there that they could not verify where those weapons and flak jackets actually came from. But guys, look at how comical this is. A couple of flak jackets, some AK-47s, and a pair of boots. That's the best you got? A pair of boots?
Command center.
Okay, so there's more weapons in Lauren Boebert's house than there was at that hospital.
True.
Even if it was at the hospital, and they could have pulled those AK-47s from anywhere and put them there. And no, they have not been able to verify anybody if comes. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that their claims are almost nothing. They've been in there now for over a day. You think that if there was a giant complex of tunnels and missile launchers, etc., underneath the hospital, that the IDF would not have paraded that all over television in the whole world 10,000 times over?
So one thing I should note, this is important because prior to us going live today, news broke that the IDF discovered a shaft. So they say,
a shaft, wow. It's a good thing they killed all those innocent civilians inside the hospital.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm being sarcastic in case you're not clear, because a lot of people in American media do actually legitimately say that. Today, Alan Dershowitz put out a meme about how it's sometimes you have to attack a hospital to save lives.
Right.
Because God forbid you should find a pair of boots in a shaft, okay? So it's actually a minor miracle that there's no tunnel underneath the hospital if that's the case, because there's tunnels all over Gaza.
Right, and understand, I mean, we don't deny that there's this intricate tunnel system all throughout Gaza, hundreds and hundreds of miles of tunnels, as has been reported. There are news reports from years ago that show some of what those tunnels look like. So I don't deny the existence of tunnels. But again, in order to justify targeting the largest hospital in Gaza, Al-Shifa, in order to justify a situation in which the hospitals are denied the fuel necessary to run the machines, in order to justify creating a situation in which premature babies need to be taken off of the incubators because they no longer have the fuel necessary to function. In order to consider that a legitimate military target, you have to provide overwhelming proof that there's this massive Hamas headquarters, and killing all those innocent civilians and patients, displacing some of them and killing others was a worthwhile goal, right? And even in that case, it disgusts me to even consider it, right? But it's not a legitimate military target based on what we have seen from the IDF. There could be some evidence in coming days. Who knows? But as it stands today, October, what's the date? 16th? As it stands today, no, we have not seen enough evidence to justify a hospital as a military target.
Look, even if they had Hamas fighters underneath the hospital, there's no way I would kill those babies. I mean, what kind of a monster says, oh yeah, take a whole bunch of those babies off the incubators, let them die. Tons of people inside have died because of the lack of electricity, power, etc. But it turns out they were lying all along. Oh wow, the IDF is a bunch of liars. Who would have guessed? But in American media, that's like scandalous to say. No, it's not at all scandalous. The Pentagon lies, the IDF lies, government, so-called defense agencies lie all the time. And this was an outrageous lie. And they're basically rubbing it in people's faces. Now they're bombing southern Gaza.
We're gonna get to that, Cenk. Just hold on, because I want to stay on the hospital story. There are other elements to this that I think are important to share with the audience, including what the former head of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth, had to say about it. Israel will have to come up with a lot more than a handful of grab-and-go rifles to justify shutting down northern Gaza's hospitals with its enormous cost for a civilian population with urgent medical needs. Now, luckily, it appears that Hillary Clinton, of all people, who's very hawkish in foreign policy, also has a red line, and it appears the red line for her happens to be hospitals as well. And it's shocking. You would never think that about Hillary Clinton. So I'm gonna read you her tweet about it. If Russian leadership would rather not be accused of committing war crimes, they should stop bombing hospitals.
Oops.
That was from March 10th of 2022. Obviously, standards for other countries don't apply to precious Israel, which gets to engage in international war crimes under the cover of the United States government, constantly defending them and supplying the weapons for them to commit those war crimes. Awesome.
Our hypocrisy knows no bounds. And when I say our, I don't mean the American people. 68% of Americans want a ceasefire. Over 80% of Democratic voters want a ceasefire. But over 90% of Democratic politicians say no, I don't care how many Democratic voters want a ceasefire. I don't care how much American voters are crying for a ceasefire. I don't care how many babies are killed. We don't care. Keep attacking the hospitals. Keep attacking and bombing in our name and with our money. That's what Democratic leadership is saying. And of course, Republican leadership agrees. So Hillary Clinton, okay, is it a war crime or is it not a war crime?
Israel's doing it, so no, it's not.
No, of course not. When Russia does it, it's a war crime. But when Israel does it, it's never ever a war crime, even though now they've killed far more Palestinian children than Russia has killed Ukrainian children. It's not even close, but they don't care about their hypocrisy. They just want to do whatever the powerful want, and they hate their own voters, and they don't want peace. So it's classic Democratic leadership to see that kind of nonsense. Admit the war crimes, and you're never gonna do it. Be honest about your funding, be honest about all this, you're never gonna do it. Defense contractors, etc.
So I do wanna give you the death toll, and I wanna be clear that unfortunately, the Palestinian Health Ministry has lost communication. Telecommunications are incredibly difficult due to the loss of fuel and the loss of power, or the lack of fuel and the loss of power, I should say. But here's what we do know so far, okay? So let's go to graphic 8 here. Israel has pounded Gaza with airstrikes and cut off food and fuel. Gaza health authorities, deemed reliable by the United Nations, say more than 11,000 people have been confirmed dead, more than 40% of them children, with many more feared trapped under rubble of bombed out homes. Now, you mentioned how many children in Ukraine have died as a result of Russia's vicious war and invasion of Ukraine. And we should look at those numbers. So that war began in February of 2022, February 24th of 2022. So from then to June of 2023, meaning June of this year, the UN put out some data about how many people had died, how many children had died. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine said that a total of 535 children were killed and 1,047 injured since the start of the conflict. So again, from February 24th of 2022, when the invasion happened, to June of 2023, a total of 535 children, according to the UN, were killed as a result of Russia's invasion into Ukraine.
So in about a year and a half, the Russians killed a little over 500 children. In about a month, Israel killed about 10 times that number. We're perfectly consistent. We're outraged by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We're outraged by the brutal attack that Hamas did against Israel and those civilians. We're also outraged at the government of Israel killing 10 times as many Palestinians as Hamas killed Israelis, and 10 times as many children as the Russians killed in Ukraine. These are absolute, undeniable facts. People in American politics and media will concoct every lie, every excuse, every piece of propaganda to say when our allies kill and murder, it's perfectly okay. It's just self-defense. If the Russians had said that, when Hamas had said that, we would all be outraged. And we'd say that's nonsense, obvious propaganda. This is also obvious propaganda, but we're always fair. Lately, New York Times, good reporting on that, and the Washington Post has a terrific piece that'll break your heart as they document the actual individuals killed. 4-year-olds, 12-year-olds, moms with daughters, grandmothers. And if you read through that and you still say, yeah, I think Israel has a right to defend itself by murdering 11,000 civilians, there's something deeply wrong with you. Check your moral compass, you're way off track.
So let's pivot to what comes next. And this has already been an incredibly brutal war. It's about to get even more brutal given some of the news that's been breaking in recent days. So the Israeli Defense Forces are now telling Palestinian civilians to flee parts of South Gaza, which of course is the part of Gaza they had already fled to, as the aerial bombardment by the IDF really focused on northern Gaza. Now I wanna be clear, there were also aerial bombardments in southern Gaza as well, but the claim was, well, just Move over to the southern region of the Gaza Strip, and that's where you should be relatively safe. Well, now Israel has ordered civilians to leave 4 towns in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. They made these demands beginning today, raising fears that its war against Hamas could spread to areas that it had told people to flee to. I mean, it's not just raising concerns. They're going to start bombing areas that people had already fled to. So think about how densely populated Gaza already was. And then they had half of the population in the north moved. They displaced them to the south, thus making the south even more densely populated. Now they're going to do aerial bombardments and air raids in the southern region of the Gaza Strip. So if you think the civilian death toll is already terrible, I mean, what do you think is going to happen in the coming weeks?
Guys, this is an indisputable genocide, and you can get your feelings hurt by that. But let me explain Srebrenica. Srebrenica was when 6,000 Muslims were killed. It was not an attempt to eradicate all Muslims from the planet. It was not an attempt to eradicate all Bosnians or Albanians or Turks or whoever else was in Srebrenica. But it was targeting Muslims in specific, and it killed civilians at a significant rate. And that was called a genocide by the United Nations. This is twice as many civilians killed. They're obviously targeting civilians. You can't say that they thought that there was a Hamas member in 50% of the households in Gaza. They bombed 50% of the households. They claim that Hamas had this headquarters in Al-Shifa Hospital. Turns out total utter lie at this point. And then half the hospitals are in the north. They were all shut down. So no, they're not even trying to. They might be trying to get Hamas here and there in different instances, but overall, the 7,000 bombs that they dropped on Gaza were indiscriminate civilian killings, and then moving millions of people. And now you've got 2.3 million people squished into even tinier piece of land, and then they're going to start dropping bombs on their heads. And imagine your child, if you have a kid, imagine your child is in a building and Israel's about to drop a bomb on it. And they go, oh, so what? Your kid was a human shield. We think maybe Hamas is in a tunnel underneath. We know that the bomb isn't going to affect the tunnel at all, but we are going to drop the bomb and your babies are going to die. But oh no, it's not a genocide. Collateral damage, wink. By the way, what the hell are you going to do with Gaza? Now they got cabinet members in Israel's government saying, yeah, maybe we should move out all those Palestinians from Gaza. You're gonna steal the land, right? You're gonna steal the land, right?
Yes, that is what they're gonna do. Let's be clear. And this isn't just me speculating about it. They're just saying it. They're just saying it. So I gotta get to all of those details in a moment. But first, the reason why we know that they're now telling Palestinian civilians to flee parts of southern Gaza is because they're dropping leaflets letting them know, we're gonna bomb. So you need to get out of Dodge, right? Although there's really nowhere to go, that's the other problem. Let's go to graphic 6. Here's what the leaflets say. The acts of Hamas terrorist group require the defense forces to act against them in the areas of your residence. For your safety, you need to evacuate your places of residence immediately and head to known shelters.
Which we're also bombing. There's nowhere to go. It's a prison. Release the hostages, Israel. Right now, Israel has 5 million hostages. Palestinians they have kept in prison for 56 long years under a brutal occupation. Now they have taken over 2 million hostages and squeezed them into a tiny area where they're now going to mercilessly drop more bombs from the sky on. It's disgusting, it's obvious genocide. There's not even any question about it at all, at all. If you think it's not a genocide, it's because you're enormously biased. And you can't see straight. And my people can never do anything wrong. Believe me, I lived it, I know it. I've seen Turks do it. I've seen every other ethnicity do it. And guys, it isn't about being Jewish at all. Every ethnicity does it when it's about them. Everyone. Nope, not me, not me, not me. Kill him, kill him, kill him. But it's not a genocide. It's not a genocide because my people are angels and the other side are monsters. And we need to kill all those people because all they understand is violence. No, all you understand is violence. That's the violence you're doing right now. That is definitely a genocide.
Finally, let's get to what the actual politicians in Israel are saying, right? Because if you don't believe us, that's fine. But you should at least believe the Israeli politicians who are saying out loud exactly what they're planning to do. Let's begin with President Isaac Herzog, who told Britain's Financial Times that a very strong force may need to remain in the Gaza Strip for the near future to prevent the Hamas militant group from reemerging. So you might interpret that as not a big deal, but let me give you more. So there's the finance minister.
By the way, it is a giant deal. It means we're keeping it.
Of course. Come on. Okay, but there's more. So you got Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who heads the religious nationalist parties within Netanyahu's coalition. He said that he supported a call by 2 members of Israeli parliament who wrote in a Wall Street Journal op-ed that Western countries, hey, right-wingers, if you happen to be listening to this, please listen carefully, okay? Because they are urging Western countries, which includes the United States, to take in Palestinian refugees because they're pushing them out. They're pushing Palestinians. They're planning to push whoever remains after their endless aerial bombardment. They're gonna push them out of the Gaza Strip and they will be made refugees and they need a place to go. So they're arguing, hey, why don't you take them, Western countries? We're gonna push people out of their own land and then we're gonna force you to deal with the mess.
Guys, you
deal with it. Let me give you the excerpts. I have to read the excerpts. So here are the individuals who wrote this in the Wall Street Journal. It's Danny Danon and Ram Ben Barak. Okay, these are members of parliament. Here's what they write in the Wall Street Journal. European countries, including Germany, Sweden, and France, have provided refuge to Syrians since the civil war started in 2011. Between 2015 and 2016, Germany alone admitted more than 1.2 million refugees and asylum seekers, about a quarter of whom were Syrian. Looking to these examples, countries around the world should offer a haven for Gaza residents who seek relocation. Countries can accomplish this by creating well-structured and internationally coordinated relocation programs. Well, why don't you guys take in Palestinian civilians?
Yeah, why don't you take them inside Israel and let them vote? Oh, you don't want to do that. Guys, this is textbook ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, definitely.
Textbook. Like when you look up ethnic cleansing in a war crime textbook, this is the exact tactics you'll see. You push out the civilian population, you make other people take them, you kill a giant number of them, you force them into long marches where they die, and then eventually you just take all the land and go, we need a little breathing space for our population. So we're just gonna take this land and we're gonna force them upon you. You know the guys who wrote that? One of them is Mossad, former Mossad, and the other one is the Likud party, so right-wing government of Israel, right? So they're saying, and they make it seem like it's like out of compassion. Oh, the Palestinians, we care so much about them. So since we're killing so much of them and they have nowhere to go and we'd like to steal their land, hey, America and Europe, why don't you take them? Because we've already ethnically cleansed them. So if we could kill them all, or you could take some of them because you could be humanitarians. How about you be a humanitarian? Of course not.
Bezalel Smotrich, again, the finance minister of Israel. I'm gonna go to the very last graphic here. He says, quote, the state of Israel will no longer be able to accept the existence of an independent entity in Gaza.
They're just gonna take it.
Guys, they say it. They just say it. They just say it, okay? I have no interest, I have no dog in the fight. I have no interest to come on the show and lie and put out false information that makes Israel look bad, okay? Israeli politicians are doing a great job on their own, looking real bad with the statements that they openly say and write in our papers in the United States. So just take that in and accept it because it's the reality of the situation. And please, for the love of God, this is my #1 pet peeve. Don't insult our intelligence when we can read and hear exactly what they want and exactly what they want to do and exactly what they carry out, day in and day out.
So I reiterate this daily, about 3-4 times a day. This is not about ethnicity, this is not about religion, this is not about Jewish people overall. Some of the best protesters, some of the people that are fighting for peace the hardest in America are Jewish Americans, willing to get arrested, lay down their safety, their comfort, etc., to go out in the streets to help Palestinians, okay? So, and Jews have been historically oppressed throughout world history, and they have suffered greatly as a people. But it is the dynamic of human beings overall. Every different ethnicity and religion does this when the situation is reversed. The minute that you have power, unfortunately, human beings are like this, they become oppressors. And in this case, Israel is clearly the oppressor. It's not close. So those two things are totally different. Don't tell me that Jewish people were oppressed in the 1800s, 1900s. That's definitely true. That's definitely true. But is that related to what the right-wing government of Israel is doing today? It is not related. It is not related. It is not because of general anti-Semitism that they had to kill all those innocent Palestinians. They are choosing to kill innocent Palestinians over and over and over again. It breaks my heart to see what they did to Israel. They took a country that was supposed to be a refuge for victims and the oppressed and have turned it into a country that is now doing the oppression itself. And it is inarguable. Yeah. I don't want to hear any excuses about why you had to murder so many civilians. It's disgusting. We should not send another dollar to Israel until they end this war and end this occupation. I don't want my money going to kill innocent Palestinian children. It's the bare minimum we can ask for. Yet in Washington, a den of scorpions, vipers, criminals, they all say, no, we don't care what the American people want. What do you think, this is a democracy? We are going to support Israel in crushing these civilians to no end. Our politicians here in America as well are monsters.
Damn right. All right, we got to take a break, but when we come back, we actually have a fantastic interview for you all. Christina Pascucci will join us to talk about her candidacy for United States Senate. She's looking to take Dianne Feinstein's seat. So we're going to talk about what's motivating her to run and more when we come back. Welcome back to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. Well, earlier this year, longtime Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein passed away, leaving her Senate seat in California vacant. Now, since then, Governor Gavin Newsom has appointed Democrat LaFonza Butler for that seat. But the election, which of course is coming up in 2024, is a very closely watched one, which includes many candidates, including Representative Barbara Lee, Senator Katie Porter, and even former Dodgers All-Star Steve Garvey, who is running as a Republican for that seat. Now, Congressman Adam Schiff is considered the Democratic establishment's favorite for that role. We'll see if he wins the seat. But there is one other candidate that you should know about. Her name is Christina Pascucci, and she's actually a first-time political candidate who's running as a Democrat. And she has a more moderate tone based on what we've seen in interviews and what we've read about. And luckily, we get to hear more about her because we're going to talk to her today. Joining us is Senate candidate Christina Pascucci. So good to have you.
Great to be with you both. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
No problem.
So you had a lengthy career in media. So you've covered a lot of political news. Even though you're not in politics, you know quite a bit about politics. So what motivated you to run? Why do you want to make the transition from media to politics?
Enter this crazy world of politics. And I mean, you know what it's like with what you've been doing on a whole other level. But I traversed the state of California for almost 20 years as a journalist and interviewed thousands of people, really explored a lot of these most pressing issues of our time. And the more and more I spoke to Californians, the more I saw that their quality of life was going down and that they weren't having their needs heard or met by our elected leaders. And so I wanted to step in and do something about it. I'm very passionate about people. I'm a humanist at heart. And I've also worked in war zones around the world. And as a humanitarian, I've gone to more than 100 countries across 7 continents, interviewing world leaders. And so I think I'm really uniquely positioned for the Senate specifically.
So Christina, obviously people want to know what the difference between you and Schiff and Katie Porter and Barbara Lee are. Yeah. So what makes you stand up from them?
Well, they have more than 50 years together already being in office, and I think we see the results of some of their policies. I think that, it's time for a new, fresh face for the Democratic Party, someone who really cares about the people, who's not tied to special interests. And my only special interest is for the future of my daughter. I'm 5.5 months pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And when I think of the future she could see right now, it makes me want to cry. It's so painful. We can do so much better than we're doing. And it is time for the next generation of leaders to step up and do it.
Okay, but how about policy? On policy, where do you differ from them?
Well, I am more moderate. I think that we have to have a different approach, for example, to business in the state of California. Right now, the the solution always seems to be just to tax more. And I think there's other ways that we can address that, where we're spurring innovation, we're spurring small businesses to thrive. We're giving them tax incentives to support their workers with childcare, which is really important to me as a mother to be, with things like transportation, because that's really hard for them to get. People always talk about some of their biggest hurdles are transportation, housing, childcare. We need to give tax incentives to businesses to address those for their workers.
Yeah, let me jump in on that because, California has always been a high tax state, but that never really stood in the way of innovation. I mean, Silicon Valley got its start in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
The agricultural industry is huge in California. Obviously, the entertainment industry is huge in California. But to be fair, there has been more and more members of the business community fleeing California for other states. And they never really cite the tax issue as the main reason. They'll talk about, it's not a overly friendly state for businesses. There are a lot of regulations. And I do think there are some areas where some red tape can be cut, okay? But I think the biggest issue that businesses have been having is the way the state handled COVID with the shutdowns. And also, it's not really a friendly environment right now for anyone, including the residents.
Yeah.
There is a crime wave in the state, especially the big cities in the state, Los Angeles and San Francisco. And there are also huge issues with how the state has tackled homelessness as well.
Yeah.
So how would you deal with those issues differently from the other candidates vying for that seat?
Yeah, well, I do think a big part of it is overregulation and overtax for businesses, according to those I've spoken to. And like you said, also public safety, homelessness. They say where are their taxpaying dollars going? When they look around them, they feel like they don't see the results of that. So where I differ is I have a dream and a vision of California and what we can create where we're supporting kids and education. I think right now the way it's set up is from the moment that kids come into the world, we are not supporting them to the greatest extent possible. And what I mean by that is maternity leave. As one example. I mean, I wasn't gonna have maternity leave at my former job beyond, I was gonna have a very small percentage of my pay and only for a limited amount of time. I think that our mothers and our kids deserve better so that they can bond with their mothers. That's one thing. Education, federally, we've underfunded education for decades. And how can you expect to have a thriving society when you're not starting there? That's the foundation for a thriving society, in my opinion.
Right, and so how about campaign finance? So you mentioned, we don't want to do the things like we've been doing. What are your views on corporate PACs or super PACs?
I don't want to take any corporate PAC money. I think that watching firsthand the money that needs to go into an election is insane. It's preventing really good people from running for office, and it's BS, and it has to stop. And one of my opponents, there was a PAC that was looking at supporting him, and he did work with the executive director. And to me, that seems not right and unethical when you're doing business with the executive director of a PAC, and then that PAC chooses to support you with money. Things like that.
Who was that?
Garvey.
Oh, Garvey, okay. Well, Republican, of course. But on the other hand, Democrats do it a lot too.
Democrats do it all the time,
I mean, Schiff right now has $30+ million. And I'm a millennial, so I'm coming up with different ways to approach, a big part of that cost goes to TV ads, for example. I'm sure $12 million a week in California alone to reach all the TV markets. That's insane. So you have to get creative and use social media and other means to reach voters. And I think that a lot of voters are getting their news anyway on social media now, as we've seen, so and online. So there's other ways now to go about it.
So I'm curious how the Democratic Party is treating you, because, and I'm curious who you think that they're favoring, because usually they favor someone in an election, and it's never the progressive firebrand, but you're not a progressive firebrand. You're practical, you're more moderate. So that's why I'm genuinely curious. Like if you were in that category, I wouldn't have to bother asking you, right? But so how have they treated you, and what's your sense of who they're favoring?
I think it's clear that they have three favorites: the people who have been establishment politicians for a long time, especially Schiff with his number of endorsements early on. I mean, it's clear. There have been Democrats who have approached me who are in elected office who are a little bit different, of a different mindset, and they've told me they're so energized by this campaign. They want to see fresh blood. They want to see new approaches, because clearly what we've been doing is not effective.
So, as I read the interviews that you've done, I really do want to know, like policy-wise, what makes you stand out from Adam Schiff, right? Like, I did see something in regard to your thoughts on immigration. In fact, during your interview with Politico, they reported that you suggested Democrats have shied away from talking about the humanitarian crisis happening at our border out of fear of running afoul of their progressive base and giving ammunition to the hard right. And you pledged to fight against the disinformation warfare that's being waged around immigration and more broadly. So I wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit more. I'm curious what you think about it, because look, just to give you a sense of where I'm at, for the first time, you have big blue cities across the country realizing that there is a migrant crisis. You see it in Chicago, you see it in New York, and I think the federal government has dropped the ball. But I'm curious what your thoughts are and what you would do differently as a member of the Senate.
Yeah, there's a few things to touch on there. So first off, members of the Democratic Party are saying that there isn't even an issue with the border, period.
I know, yeah.
There was this interview I saw on CNN where a member of the squad was talking about that, and she was asked, so you don't think there's a border crisis? And she said, no. And I think that is disingenuous, and she's lying to the American people. There is a humanitarian crisis, it's very clear. There's a major issue with sex trafficking. That's something I've worked on extensively around the world. I'm also involved in a nonprofit that tackles that head on. And so I think we need to look at it from the humanitarian perspective and also from the national security perspective, because there is no doubt both of those are issues. And I've been involved with both at the border. So one important thing as a journalist, and something that makes me different too, is storytelling. Right now we are so polarized. We're dehumanizing one another. We are othering people who disagree with us. And a big point to make is that we're all Americans and we should all be in this together. And a net, if I win and you lose, it's a net loss. So we have to figure out a way to collaborate and find a win-win and reach out to those we disagree with. So when it comes to the border, specific policies that I would support are, for example, more judges to help expedite the asylum seeking process. I would support more Border Patrol agents. They're just swimming. They're completely outnumbered and they really need help doing their job. I would support a more efficient path to citizenship. I think that's incredibly important. And that's just as a starting point.
All right. Okay, well, Christina Pascucci, where can the audience learn more about your campaign?
ChristinaForCalifornia.com.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Really good to see you guys.
All right, and there it is. And the links will be in the description box if you want to check out the website, etc. Okay. All right, we'll be right back. Back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, Donna McNill, Nicole Robertson, Tiny Dancer Dragon, which sounds so fun. They've all joined and they're all American Heroes and Young Turks members now. And speaking of heroes, Chris Birch gifted 10 Young Turks memberships on YouTube and Benjamin Morrill gifted 5. You guys are amazing. We appreciate you. Everybody hit the join button below either to become a Young Turks member or upgrade so we can keep prices low. We appreciate all of you guys. And by the way, I'm super happy that a US Senate candidate has joined us in California. Here we are in the middle of California, a progressive show, and yet none of the other candidates have asked to come on, which I find to be curious. So apparently they don't want your vote. So that's an interesting note for Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, let alone Adam Schiff. Duly noted that they don't want your vote. Okay.
I love the salt. Okay, speaking of salt, let's get to our next story.
This morning, tensions over the Israel-Hamas war boiling over into clashes. Pro-Palestinian protesters calling for a ceasefire, clashing with police in front of the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. Videos posted to social media show protesters standing with their arms interlocked, blocking the DNC doors as they get into a shoving match with police.
Last night, protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza decided to protest right outside of DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C. And as you can see from the videos, there were in fact some clashes with Capitol Police. And while police say that the demonstrators are the ones who initiated the physicality of what you just saw there, video evidence and firsthand accounts seem to suggest otherwise. So we're gonna go through the evidence as we see it and discuss what actually transpired here. Now, the demonstrators say that police even used pepper spray and fired projectiles containing chemical irritants at them. The protest was organized by 3 different advocacy groups, including If Not Now, which urges US Jewish groups to end their support of Israel's policies toward Palestinians. You also have Jewish Voice for Peace, a group that advocates for Palestinian independence. And finally, the Democratic Socialists of America, which I'm assuming our audience doesn't really need too much in detail about, you know who they are. Now, they did attempt to block the entrance to the DNC building, which is in fact an illegal form of protest. Officers, according to US police, Capitol Police, I should say, had worked to keep back approximately 150 people who are illegally and violently protesting in the area, a characterization activist groups later disputed, and escorted members of Congress, including the top House Democrats, from the area. Now, about 10 Democratic members, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, were inside as these clashes occurred. And according to the authorities, US Capitol Police, in a statement Thursday, defended its actions, saying that the protesters were not peaceful and said the protesters moved dumpsters in front of the exits and pepper sprayed police officers. Quote, "We have handled hundreds of peaceful protests, but last night's group was not peaceful," end quote, the statement says. Now, there are disputes about the protesters using pepper spray. So far, no evidence has emerged showing a single protester using pepper spray against Capitol Police. And in every video I've seen where people get physical, it's when police are trying to forcibly remove or move the protesters as they're trying to block the entry to the DNC headquarters. Now, before we get to the reaction from congressmen like Brad Sherman, any initial thoughts, Cenk?
Yeah, I can't wait to get to Sherman. But first, let me be clear about the facts. Dave Uygur from Semaphore was there, and he said he did not see any protesters using pepper spray, but he did see police using pepper spray. So the police statement, shockingly, is not true. And so when and no one tried to enter the building. Weigel and every reporter on the scene confirmed no one tried to break into the building. That's another lie put out there by government officials, including the Democrats. And so now people are saying, oh my God, January 6th is, no, wait. I remember the cops in January 6th. A lot of them let the protesters through. And a lot of them, of course, were assaulted. I saw that as well. But overall, not much of a action there. Here you got left-wing protesters, all of a sudden the violence comes out, the pepper spray comes out against them. And I wanna be very clear, as far as I can tell, there's only one potential thing that I would argue with here, but I gotta give you the facts on that too. Being outside the building when the Democrats are inside and not listening to them, wonderful. Being super loud, wonderful. And locking arms, no problem with that. The only issue is moving the dumpsters in front of the exits because you can't block people in. But according to reporting, no, they created a pathway for people to exit. It's just that they created a pathway so that they could speak to them on their way out. Now, they could say, hey, I didn't want to go through the masses. These citizens bother me. I was here to do the bidding of my donors and we're all beloved politicians, and how dare you even try to speak to us? But they didn't. It turns out they did not block the exits, so they didn't do anything wrong. So that was a really strong, loud protest because the politicians will not listen to us. And that's a stone cold fact. Over 80% of Democratic voters say that they want a ceasefire. And over 90% of Democratic politicians, including every person in that building, says, no way. We don't care what our voters want. We're gonna shove war down their throat. And by the way, they're Democrats.
So let's get to one of those Democrats, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman, who not only tweeted about all of this, but also went on media to talk about it. So let's take a look at the video first.
Yesterday, there were over 200,000 pro-Israel demonstrators with a permit entirely peaceful. And here you have a demonstration less than 1,000th as large that's also getting publicity. And it's getting publicity because their willingness to attack police, as they did with pepper spray, is a force multiplier. A few demonstrators willing to attack police getting a fair amount of publicity, whereas the amount of publicity for 200,000 peaceful demonstrators proportionately less.
I mean, look, it looks chaotic, but when you really focus in on what's happening in the videos we're watching, the police are pushing the protesters around, and the protesters aren't throwing punches. They're not assaulting the cops. I don't know. Anyway, all right. Well, Sherman also tweeted about this, saying, was just evacuated from the DNC after pro-terrorist anti-Israel protesters grew violent. They're calling for a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Calling for a ceasefire doesn't make you a terrorist. Okay?
Yeah. Hey,
or pro-terrorist.
Brad Sherman, Dick Cheney called, asked for his talking points back. By the way, good news, it's not working anymore. This is the same kind of thug behavior that Congress people like Brad Sherman have been using for so long. Oh, if you don't want to attack Iraq, you're a terrorist sympathizer. You're pro-terrorist. Oh, you care about Palestinian lives. Terrorist, anti-Semite. Yeah. Not working at all. Brad Sherman, go take that crap somewhere else. The American people are not interested. Your voters are not interested. I hope they throw your ass out of office. Now look, talking about the 200,000 protesters that came to support Israel, nothing wrong with that. Great, that's also America. So I don't happen to agree that America should keep bombing innocent Palestinian children and civilians, and not all the 200,000 that were in favor of Israel agree with that. A lot of them just love Israel and want to support it, etc. And there's variety there, but that's great. That's America. There's no problem. We're okay with both sides doing any kind of protest, assembly, etc. Right? But Brad Sherman says, if you disagree with me, you're a pro-terrorist. Yeah. I've heard it my whole life for 20 straight years from Republicans and a lot of Democrats like Brad Sherman. War. And you're worried, oh, you're precious little ass. Oh my God, they created only a pathway for me. I demand roses at my feet, and these people dare to disagree with me. But you're not worried about the Palestinian children that are having bombs dropped on their heads.
Of course not.
Incinerated, grandmothers murdered over and over again. And these good Americans show up, most of them Jewish, by the way, and then you call them pro-terrorist. There's Rabbi Rosenberg gave a speech. Is she pro-terrorist? Is she anti-Semitic? No, she's an amazing, wonderful American that showed up and said, not in our name. But Brad Sherman always in favor of more oppression of Palestinians. You're the racist, Brad Sherman. You're the racist who says that anybody who is in favor of protecting innocent Palestinians is a terrorist. We don't want your crap anymore. I hope you're voted out of office immediately. Over 80% of Democratic voters disagree with you, and your actions are, as usual, monstrous.
So let me give you the rest of what he says, because he lies in this tweet. So not only does he call those demonstrators pro-terrorist, anti-Israel protesters who grew violent, pepper spraying police, that wasn't true, there's no evidence of that, and attempting to break into the building. Well, again, Dave Weigel, a reporter previously from the Washington Post, he's now over at Semaphore. He was there on the ground reporting from the protest, and here's what he said, quote, I was reporting outside this protest. Nobody tried to enter the building. They were trying to block off entrances, but had their backs turned to them. He also said, yes, the protest was illegal civil disobedience. Protesters had legal observers on site and organizers telling people where to move if they didn't want to be arrested. But people, including congressmen, who claim that protesters tried to break in, were not being truthful. And evidence also suggests that it was actually the police who perpetrated most of the violence. In videos posted after the protest, you actually see the police shoving and dragging demonstrators as they're linked by their arms outside of the DNC building, and as they're chanting, terroristic things like "Let Gaza live" and "Which side are you on?" And let's give you the examples. Let's show you the receipts. Let's take a look. In case Brad Sherman has difficulty differentiating the protesters from the police are the ones with the shields and the heavy garb and all of that stuff. Those are the cops, not the protesters. The ones charging at the protesters, those are the cops. By the way, Jewish Voices for Peace held a press conference today to discuss what happened last night. I really want Brad Sherman and anyone who agrees with him to see what terrorist sympathizers look like, according to them.
Night, together with my congregants and my community, we came together to have a candlelight vigil at the Democratic National Headquarters to pray for all the lives lost in Gaza and in Israel, to pray for the hostages to be freed and come home. And that act of peace and moral act of civil disobedience was violently shut down by police who escalated against us and injured 90 of our community members. Instead of being able to actually talk to our elected officials and pray with them and sing with them and ask them for a ceasefire, the police shoved our people down the steps. I'm caring for my congregants with a concussion who've been tear gassed, who are devastated this morning, in addition to all the lives lost, are dealing with their own pain and trauma now of this violence from the police. And we are going to continue through that to call for a ceasefire.
Something that I've kind of noticed about this war compared to other wars between Israelis and Palestinians is that I think this might be the first time that there is a sizable portion of the country that is willing to vocalize their disagreement with the United States providing endless support, unwavering commitment and support to Israel. And so for the first time, you have both politicians and authorities not really knowing what to do with this. You get what I'm saying? It seems shocking to them.
Yeah, they're like, I don't get it. I always vote for war. I always vote for death and destruction. I always lie. Now people seem upset about it. It's weird.
And the voters, you would just shut up and take it.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they seem to be aware of what's going on and they want to fight back.
So let me explain the dynamics here, because this is not about religion or ethnic backgrounds at all. You see, and by the way, Rabbi Rosenberg and Jewish Voices for Peace, etc., are much more faithful to the traditions of Judaism than Brad Sherman is. The traditions of Judaism is to stand up for the oppressed, and that's part of what's beautiful about Jewish culture. Okay, the Jewish culture is not about doing wars and calling anyone who disagrees with you terrorists. No, you're supposed to question the rabbi. You're supposed to seek knowledge, etc. They're far more faithful to that tradition than Brad Sherman is. And then he calls them pro-terrorists. So I looked up Brad Sherman's record on the Iraq war, because I suspected, as I've now seen his career for a couple of decades, that he had, I knew he voted yes, but that I suspected he was enthusiastic. And having read his speech again before the Iraq war, boy, was he enthusiastic. He said that he wanted the resolution to attack Iraq to pass overwhelmingly. He said he wanted overwhelming margins for that war. And then I'm just gonna read you the first paragraph of his speech. He said, until September 11th, we knew that the dangers we knew what the dangers were, but we chose to ignore them. We knew Saddam was developing nuclear weapons and had biological weapons. We knew that Al-Qaeda had killed hundreds at our embassies in East Africa. We knew of these dangers and we did not act. Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with Iraq. Brad Sherman knew that. They all knew it. He's an unbelievable liar that connected Iraq to Al-Qaeda. And no nuclear weapons, no biological weapons. Brad Sherman has been lying his entire political career. Whenever it comes time to bomb innocent Muslims, Brad Sherman always votes yes and encourages all the rest of his colleagues to vote in overwhelming margins to keep killing innocent Muslim civilians. Hundreds of thousands of civilians killed by America because of people like Brad Sherman. It's not his ethnic background, 1%. No way does he represent Jewish Americans. And by the way, the polling indicates that. No way does he represent Democratic voters. And the polling indicates that. No, he represents the interests of war, violence, and greed. That's who Brad Sherman is.
When we come back for the second hour of the show, some unfortunate developments of young people on TikTok reconsidering whether Osama bin Laden was bad. We've got that and more when we come back. Don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.